My name is Prachi. I'm a labor educator at South Seattle College, but I'm also a lead trainer here at EWalk. EWalk is it was an organization that started during the pandemic as a partnership between Democratic Socialists of America and UE, which is United Electrical Workers, and we help to organize workers all over the country. And I'm going to introduce our panelists here today. And then we're going to get started on hearing more about how they organize their workplaces remotely, and really excited for them to share their stories. So our panelists today are Emily Mazza, who used to be a software engineer and now is a labor researcher and member of Student Workers of Columbia UAW 2710, and a volunteer with Collective Action in Tech and EWalk, and is a member of socialist group Left Voice. We have Hesh Hassan, who is a software engineer and was part of a solidarity group of workers at Twitter, engaging in collective actions to navigate the final days of pre-Elon Twitter. We have here Vicky Crossan, who is a software engineer at New York Times and has been organizing since 2019, and currently is helping to bargain their first contract. Then we have JJ Skolnick. JJ is a writer, editor, and organizer, and former contract administrator at SCIU Local 1, and they're a member of Bandcamp United. And lastly, but not the least, we have Keith Young. Keith is a software engineer at Find Help, where workers voted to unionize in April of this year. Keith spent 2 years on the organizing committee for the Find Help Solidarity Network. So the first question that we're going to start with is, how did you go about getting contact info of your coworkers and mapping your workplace? We know that this is something that a lot of people who work remotely struggle with, is getting contact info and figuring out who exactly is in their workplace and being able to reach out to them. So I'm going to start with Vicky. Vicky, would you like to share your experience with that?
Absolutely. So just like in-person organizing, the most important thing is to start with the people you know that you have personal connections with. But if you're looking out at your organization and there are like a lot of people that you don't know, probably if you're a large enough group, you need to start being strategic about second, third jumps, about talking to the friends of the friends, figuring out who you know from different groups, like the parents group that meets up, even if it's not the team that you work with directly. I joined a lot of clubs when we started organizing so that I would get more excuses to talk to people. One of our biggest strategies is to do the mega spreadsheet where you write down everybody's name, where they are, things like that. And that can help you be really strategic about which direction you need to really put in the effort to get more organizers on board so that you can sort of distribute the work out that way. Because of course people respond better to people that they've spoken with before. And then I wanted to mention that if you just ask somebody to talk to them, particularly in a remote workplace, a lot of people are really hungry for like more interaction. And I've had a lot of luck being like, hey, we haven't gotten to talk yet. Do you want to like get coffee and just hang out for a half hour? I want to hear what you do. People respond really well to that. They want to talk about themselves. They want to tell you how they feel about work. And at that point you can start getting information about what they care about so that you can organize them up.
Really awesome. It's really great that you kind of figured out who were the folks that were in your group, but then also helped to figure out who are the other people that could talk to the other departments or other places where you couldn't reach. Emily, do you want to talk a little bit about issue campaigns and how that could be part of building that contact list?
Yeah, I've seen this work really well for a lot of groups that a lot of OCs that I've interacted with as a volunteer with Collective Action in Tech, and now also a volunteer with EWalk, that issue campaigns are a really great first or second step in your union organizing timeline, partially because it's a really great way to just start conversations with people you don't know yet, people you haven't like worked with that directly. And it's also obviously a really great way to start a conversation with somebody that's on your team that you do know, but get them started talking about something that isn't directly related to work. An example is I'm currently volunteering with an organizing committee of really brilliant tech workers who are doing a campaign about salary equity at their company because they realize that people with the same job descriptions are getting paid like wildly different amounts. And so they're starting a salary transparency spreadsheet, and they started by having one-on-ones with a bunch of their coworkers. Again, like, you know, remote organizing is the same as regular organizing. So you start with the people that you know and trust, like Vicky said, and then you like jump out to like further network points. But starting that conversation about like, hey, not bringing up the union yet, but saying like, have you heard that like salary is really unequal here? We're starting this spreadsheet where people can share their information. What do you think about that? Have you interacted with like have you heard about this? It's a really great way to agitate. It's a really great way to have like a first conversation with coworkers about issues, figure out if this is an issue that even matters to them. And then also at the end, you like, not at the end, but midway through, you have this tool also. You've got a spreadsheet that you can like bring to other people and say, who haven't put their information on it, and say like, hey, have you seen this? Have you seen this like data that we have that people are getting paid wildly different amounts of money? It's a really great conversation starter. It's a really great agitation tool. And it's a really great way to break the ice and get people started talking about like, maybe this isn't an issue that they care about, but like bad management is coming up for them, or like the health insurance plan just really isn't working for like what they personally need. And this is just like a really great leeway into that conversation. And that can be a salary transparency spreadsheet or an open letter about an issue that's happening at work, like return to office, but just having like a tangible artifact that you can start a conversation with, I've seen work really well for people.
Totally. And it's really important to be able to contact as many people as you can when you're building any sort of campaign, right? Because if you have more people on board, you're more likely to A, win, and also B, you're more likely to, as you said, Emily, figure out what are the widely and deeply felt issues of the workplace, which is so important. Kind of moving forward with that, thank you, Vicky and Emily, for sharing. We're going to talk about how do we initiate conversations with those folks that, you know, we do initially make that kind of reach to contact them. How do we initiate and hold conversations, especially when we are working remotely? And I'm going to start with Keith on this. How did you initiate and hold conversations with coworkers?
Howdy, I'm Keith, site reliability engineer at Find Help. One of the, ultimately the end goal is getting off of a company platform, getting off of Google Chat, getting off of the Google email, Slack, whatever y'all use. And so to that end, you start with trust and start, conversing with people, right? Be it in maybe your work Slack or whatever has like a channel where people will share music that they're listening to. Maybe there's like Vicky said, a parents group, etc. Finding friends, building relationships so that you can get to a place where it's not super uncomfortable to say, hey, there's something I really wanted to talk to you about. Can we do this offline? And that's how we went about it. And that's how that was a lot of what we did at Find Help.
Yeah. Do you want to talk a little bit about the Discord chat and how that went and how that transformed into a bigger platform?
Sure. The Discord started in early 2021, and that became a forum for people to share what their working conditions were like. And at this point, this was about a year into the pandemic. A lot of us did not know what some of the people in other departments were facing. A lot of us didn't quite know what the pay inequity situation looked like for other folks who may have had similar titles. And this was kind of our first taste of breaking down those barriers and building that network. And I started including people in that network with, as I think someone mentioned, the people I was closest with. And then from there, we just gathered enough momentum that the outreach was able to take further and bolder leaps as the momentum increased.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll definitely like dive into more of that in the second question as well. Hash, do you want to talk about your experience with initiating conversations with your coworkers?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm Hesh. I was a software engineer at Twitter during the initial acquisition process. And yeah, during that process, definitely building off of what Keith said, it was super critical for even just supporting each other throughout what was like an incredibly stressful time, was getting off platform. Luckily, it was really easy to convince people to do that because there was essentially a bunch of leaks happening where anything you said on like company Slack or whatever was going to make it to the press. So it's kind of an easy sell to be like, hey, we should not be talking here because if you say something, then yeah, it might end up on the Washington Post tomorrow. So that was an easy sell. But I found that in my experience, the best thing for getting people off platform was kind of this group DM to like group chat on iMessage pipeline where I was essentially in all of these different like group chats just from my time working at Twitter, like one that was like just people who used to go sit together at the cafeteria and like would coordinate times to go sit, or another one of like people who are into like learning how to make music, whatever, right? And from there, it's really easy to just be like, hey, I have something spicy I want to share or something. Can y'all join this Signal group? Or do y'all have iMessage? And that's a really easy way to get people off platform. And because it's a group, now you have like 5 or 6 people's direct contact information. And then you just start normalizing chatting on the new forum as opposed to the company platform. And yeah, it's just incredible. Super easy way to kind of completely shift the vibe of a conversation or a group context too.
Yeah, that's so real. And we see in the chat, someone put like, how do you move beyond your immediate network? And we'll kind of talk a little bit about this in this next question here. And the question is, how do you build relationships with your coworkers remotely? So, we got the initial name, contact, we got the initial kind of conversation, but then how do you really build relationships? Because we know that relationship building is really important, especially as we move forward in any sort of campaign trying to make changes in our workplaces. So with this question, we'll start with JJ and then, yeah, let's start with JJ.
Hi, I'm JJ. I am an organizer with Bandcamp United. We were somewhat fortunate in that like the company got acquired and we were already having like individual conversations about organizing stuff before all of that happened. But after the acquisition, a Signal group with most of the people in the company, except for like top leadership, sprung up to just like talk about it because we were all surprised and there was a lot of new stuff to talk about. So you could sort of see in that Signal group like who was agitated about certain issues, and easy to move them then from into individual Signal conversations and then over to Discord, where we were creating a space for everybody that was in the bargaining unit. And in that Discord, there were we created like tons of different places to talk about not just work questions or talk through all hands that we were having, or talk through all of those like individual workday things, but also to build a lot of social networks that we didn't necessarily have at work. And I think people were really starving for that. Like our Slack is a place where people come in, and our work Slack is like a place where people come in and are very enthusiastic about their individual hobbies and ideas, and they're very like into talking about regular socializing stuff with different people, but it's kind of quiet. So it can feel like those bonds aren't there. And the Discord sort of ended up being that space where people were like enthusiastically sort of bonding with each other. And through that, we were also having like regular organizing conversations, like regular one-on-ones. And we started a Friday Zoom happy hour as well. So people could just come, blow off steam, talk about what was going on in their lives. And that was really, really helpful for a lot of people. So it's just a lot of different ways that you can build community. And once you start doing that, you can find, especially in like fully remote workplaces like ours is, people are really starved for that and they'll really respond well.
Yeah, absolutely. Keith, do you want to talk a little bit about what it's like talking to people or reaching out to people who may not be fully open to building this community up front?
Yeah, so at the end of the day, you got to talk to everyone. That's kind of the way a campaign works. But and you got to talk to everyone multiple times. It requires frequent check-ins, or at least some varying levels of frequency, right? I found that there were some people that I could chat with, and I didn't necessarily need to check in with them again the very next week, because they weren't what I would consider high touch, right? Like some people are just in it, and they're not going to change, and they're not going to move, and you can just you can roll with that and you can be comfortable with that. But then some people a little more on the fence, those are the conversations that I would come back to and visit regularly, because those are the people that you want to be taking care of and taking extra care of, and checking in with. And when you're building relationships like that, it really drives home the point that these conversations should be question driven, and I should not be approaching a conversation prescribing anything to anyone. I should be approaching a conversation and finding out what issues resonate with people.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. Hash, I know that you have had some experience with kind of taking a conversation from online to then on the phone. You want to talk a little bit more about that and yeah, share it with everybody?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just kind of building off of what's already been alluded to and explicitly said, in the remote context, people are alienated. People want to connect with their coworkers. And that is a benefit that we have in a remote context. And what another concrete benefit is that, when you're in the office, it's like a pretty hard ask to ask someone to go for like a coffee. It's cutting into their day. It's like they have to physically move, whereas when we're remote, we all know that like many of our colleagues are trying to like do the dishes, maybe from 1 to 1:30, or they're cooking lunch or whatever. And that's always a really easy opportunity I found for me to, if I'm in my like group iMessage with people who I'm trying to talk to about issues at work, I can just message one of those folks directly and be like, hey, I'm about to cook lunch. Are you about to cook lunch? I know it's 11:30 roughly your time. So do you want to have like a chat while we're prepping or something? And that's like a really easy way to kind of make it feel a little less formal, respect people's time, and also, yeah, just take advantage of the fact that, we can have these sorts of informal chats in a way that doesn't sort of take away and add to burnout and make people feel more stressed about their work.
Mhm. Yeah, and I remember you also talking about taking advantage of like one-on-ones. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, just one thing I've been always trying to like hammer to people who I try to organize with, or even just to myself really, is that in tech, especially in remote tech, managers have like a monopoly on relationships in the workforce. And, a lot of people look at their manager as the only person who can solve their problems, as their most trusted person on their team, as the person they're closest to on their team. And as organizers, we should see that as a massive threat. That is a massive threat. And so as an organizer, I think that one goal that you should have for yourself is to try to have at least as many check-ins as with your teammates as your manager has with them. And that does feel like a big ask, but again, in the remote context, many people are really actually like hungry for this sort of connection with people. And it's super easy to put some one-on-one, like put a one-on-one in someone's calendar and have it be like a multitasking one-on-one, like I mentioned earlier, have it be part of a walk, have it be part of your lunch prep, have it be part of you cleaning up a little. And we're not restricted to the same sort of confines that a manager is in terms of establishing this regular cadence and ensuring that certain topics are addressed and having it take this sort of like authoritative form. We can be much more flexible. And yeah, I think a lot of people will find, and I've found in my experience, people are very, very receptive and interested in regular check-ins. So yeah, just throw down some time in people's calendar and see how they respond and work with the cadence from there.
Love that. And I was muted. I also saw in the chat, Anna, you put that you work in disability services, and you work with a lot of deaf and hard of hearing coworkers, and you keep a note on who you can do a phone call with and a Zoom call with. That's great information to put onto a workplace chart. And I think that really adds into what Hesh was saying is like, we're trying to build accessible relationships, especially as management may not try to create those relationships as being accessible. So we're trying our best to do that. Emily or do you have anything to add to this, Emily or Vicky, to the conversation around building relationships?
I think something that's jumping out to me about what everybody's saying so far is there's something that I'd like really love if everybody in the audience could walk away with is specific language that you can keep in your back pocket or write down as a script for yourself for sending these kinds of messages. Because you're probably already interacting with your coworkers over some kind of your remote coworkers is over some kind of technology that's owned by your boss. Folks have talked before. Keith, I think, was talking about the importance of getting people off platform and off of work devices. And that can look very different for lots of people. Some of your coworkers are only going to ever want to talk on the phone. Some will only ever want to SMS text. Some people are super tech savvy and will want to get on Discord, and that's awesome. And it's about figuring out where your coworkers are, but the first message is always going to be over whatever means of communication you already have a relationship with them with, which is probably going to be the work device. And some folks have said some like really, really useful like initial phrases that I think for me and for people that I've worked with in the past, it's been really helpful just to write those down and have them, because the act of reaching out to somebody, especially not somebody who's not someone you already know. We've been talking a little bit about moving out of your like the people that you already like know really well and have relationships with and going to those like second order or third order contacts. Once you've exhausted your initial network, it can be kind of anxiety inducing to reach out to folks that you've never worked with directly or never met in person, your remote coworkers who are like a second order or third order relationship over like a Slack DM or a Microsoft Teams DM. And sometimes it can really help to just have that message there. And also to keep in mind what everybody's been saying so far is that like, if you send somebody a message, to paraphrase what Vicky said before, like, hey, we've never worked together yet, but like I see you around, do you want to like have a virtual coffee or have a one-on-one? Nobody's going to say no to that. One, because as everybody's been saying, as Hesh just reiterated, everybody's, and as JJ said before, everybody's really starved for these social connections in a remote workplace, and also because saying no is rude. No one is ever going to say no to that. So that's a really, I just wanted to highlight what Vicky said, that's a really great thing to have in your back pocket. And then something that Hesh just said again, even just like 10 minutes before your scheduled meeting, having a phrase you can just pop in the chat like, hey, I've been on so many Zoom meetings today. I've got Zoom fatigue. Would it be okay if we had like a walking one-on-one where I call you and we both talk on the phone and walk around our respective neighborhoods? That can be a great way to get people off platform also, and also to get somebody's phone number so that you can then text them and continue the conversation and follow up off platform too. Just wanted to highlight that I think what folks have been saying is really, really useful.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say, building off of what Emily just said about having like a little script at the beginning, this can also be really empowering for folks who are more nervous about doing outreach to say, like, this is what I've been saying. Here, you try this and we can work on it together and iterate and things like that. And it means that a lot of people who have never, say, cold called somebody have something to start with and then sort of tailor it to their own approach.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially as like this first off building relationship really leads into figuring out if we have enough people to then do sort of collective actions that can, help us to push solutions that we have in regards to the issues that we're having at our workplace. And so that's kind of a structure test that you can calculate and see on some sort of chart or map that you all talked about in the beginning, to see how many people are on board to even thinking about creating these changes and collective action. So this kind of like leads into our next question as to what kinds of collective actions have you all done remotely? And so I'll start this question off with JJ.
We did tons of stuff. We definitely we have an incredible design team at work, and they put together Zoom backgrounds and profile picture, like Slack profile picture backgrounds that people could change their information to. And we, those of us who were willing to speak up about our participation in the union, would use those. We also changed our Slack status to I'm voting yes as soon as the union was announced. We did sort of like Slack actions in different channels, talking about things like what would a union mean for Bandcamp and what we were excited about, or like sharing really good things that people were saying about the union on Twitter, or stuff of that nature. We put together a petition that a whole bunch of different people signed. We put it out on Twitter. We got over 3,000 signatures. And we worked with the Union of Musicians and Allied Workers to bring that to management, to show how much support we had behind us from the community of users who use Bandcamp. A lot of us are also musicians, label owners, et cetera, and are part of those communities. And so we did a lot of outreach to those communities. And that's one of the reasons that folks were so excited about supporting us. Tons of different stuff you can do. Like, there's really like, get creative with it, honestly.
That's really awesome. It seems like that kind of community organizing really gave a lot to your campaign and also took away from the target in a way, because it allowed them to see that, oh, there's a lot of people who really support this group of workers having a union. And if you don't give them a union, it can be harmful to them. And so that's a really great way of thinking about any sort of collective action. Vicky, what was your experience like?
So since we did the bulk of our organizing in 2020, we had a really rapid shift from kind of hybrid to like extremely remote, and now very remote still. The ways we tried to think about things, there were a couple of like questions we would ask, like, what are the affordances of whatever technology we already have access to? So in Slack, you can change your avatar, you can change your name, things like that. You can upload and name emojis in most Slacks. And so we sort of played with each of those toggles when we needed to. And we would give sort of a default value for things, like maybe my name would be Vicky Just Cause Crossin', or maybe it would be like Twitter, pick a spooky name, just make it unions, so that people can be creative when they want to. And it makes it a little bit more fun, but they have a safe option. You know how you can invite people to events via your work Google Calendar or something? That's a thing. Then there is also a question of like what it's easier to do when you don't need to have people physically in a location. And this is sort of building up large groups. So you can do like email reply all campaigns, which is easy. You're sitting in a chair, you click send, you schedule send, something like that. You can flood Q&As, you can flood conference calls or bargaining or things like that. You can have virtual rallies that people don't need for us to walk into Times Square to do. They show up on Zoom, they get hype, they, share information. It's great. And then on top of that, because you are frequently like queuing up information for, say, a petition in advance, you can make guarantees that you maybe couldn't as easily do otherwise. You can give assurances like, we won't send this petition until 80% of us sign it. And we can look at the information in advance and be like, we passed 50%, look at all these other people that who have signed it. And you can sort of take advantage of the ability to collect and share data in a different way because you have more like pre-processing time, if that makes sense.
Like what stage, both this question is for Vicky and JJ, at what stage did you all start to do some of these collective actions?
This was after we went public. It's definitely not safe to do it before that stage.
When did you go public?
Oh, sorry.
We went public in March of this year, and we won our union in June.
What triggered you all to go public?
We hit a critical mass of folks. We had a super majority of workers, and we knew we had that super majority. We had done some structure tests to make sure like the trust was sound, people were there. That super majority signed their names onto the public letter going public, which is that's a huge leap of faith to do that. And so once we knew that we had folks that were willing, we had 40 folks that were willing to do that out of a bargaining unit of 64. That was the point at which we were like, we're ready to do this.
That's awesome. So you got the petition signed, and then that was kind of like, okay, we have enough people signing onto this petition, let's go public. That's like a really great example of a structured test. Vicky, go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to say that we did have a petition collective action before we went public, and it wasn't organized. It was deliberately not organized in such a way that would out us as having a very structural understanding of who's on what team. We didn't necessarily use the union phone tree that we've been building up to make those connections, but because we had all been talking to people more outside of our groups, we were able to get a petition spun up really quickly and really push for change, even though we were not a union. And because it is a collective action, we were protected in doing that, even not as a union, not as publicly organizing.
That's awesome. Hesh, do you want to talk a little bit about your experience in a collective action?
Sure, yeah, I can talk super briefly. So obviously towards the end stages of what some people like to refer to as Twitter 1.0, the organizing was a lot less intentional. It was mostly sort of this informal response to what was truly like a lack of information and a lack of certainty around the future. And so, going back and talking about how a lot of us started communicating off platform through these group chats on Signal, on iMessage, we started to see a bunch of the same sort of questions pop up around impending layoffs. There were all of these leaks to the press that, Elon was planning on laying off 80% of the company or 70% or 50%, or wasn't laying off anyone, or maybe wasn't even acquiring the company anymore. And so we started to see these same sorts of questions come up, and we started to see also a lot of the same sort of anxieties and fears and concerns. And so a few of us decided to work together to consolidate all of these questions and then build a Google Doc that we started to then crowdsource through these communication channels answers to these questions. What happens if someone gets laid off? What happens in this state? What happens in this state? What happens in this country? And sooner or later, we had this really massive, essentially survival guide for the last few weeks of Twitter that was super helpful. We also partnered with some people and got in touch through friends of friends with folks like Collective Action in Tech, the Tech Workers Coalition, DSA Tech Action. and many more who were able to help us add content to that, help us, distribute that. And, we were able to get it to like thousands of people at Twitter and beyond Twitter days before, 3,000 people got laid off. So it really helped a lot of people. And that's one thing that, really was the reason we were able to do that, was because we had all of these, different communication channels, and we were able to like very quickly receive new information and get information out.
Mhm. Yeah, at the end of the day, like we're trying to build a network of coworkers to help each other through whatever situation comes about. And that's the really great thing about having a union, is that it's like we protect us type of mentality, which is really important, especially when thinking about abusive workplaces. Does anyone else want to add anything to this question about collective actions that they've done remotely before we move into the questions that you all have been putting in the chat? And, feel free to put in more questions. Awesome. So since no one else wants to add anything to this question, we are going to move into the questions. So we have a few security questions. So how about we just put those all together? Just so that for the sake of time, since we only have 15 minutes. So we have a few questions about large chats and when people, when do you bring people into those large chats? And then how do you avoid detection from management when it comes to those large chats? And then the second part of it is, how do you secure a Zoom call? How is that information obtainable by an employer? So did y'all ever experience any sort of security breaches, or have any advice to give when it comes to avoiding detection from management?
I can only speak to the large chats portion, and our chat, like our bargaining unit, is fairly small compared to, I see that Clara mentioned our unit size is going to be 3,000 people, and ours is 64. So that's very small comparatively. But really, it was like once we got to talking about like dropping the U word, or like talking about unions, and realized that people were on board for organizing, that's when we invited folks into that chat. And we really like worked on building those individual relationships so that there was that bond of trust there, and we could trust that people weren't going to leak. And I think it speaks to the power of our organizing and of our workers, that nothing did leak before we went public, because people really trusted each other and wanted to protect each other and take care of each other.
Mhm. It's kind of nice to realize that more people care about each other than don't. Does anyone else have any advice around security breaches?
Yeah, I do. So if one happens, don't lose your cool. Make sure you circle back up with your group and talk to your people, and talk about what the potential implications may be, and just have a plan that's worked out and that everybody can agree on. We had a few situations that were a little dicey on my campaign, and ultimately the way we stayed safe is we just made sure that we were all on the same page, and we just kept moving. Trying to think of what else I have to add to that. Yeah, and generally speaking, people are very respectful of conversations that are had in confidence. I did not have any problem with that. Obviously your risks there go up a little bit when you start cold calling people, but that's a bold step you should only be taking if you have some pretty serious momentum behind you.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Emily, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a couple of short things to add to this. The first is echoing what JJ and Keith have said. Organizing moves at the speed of trust, and that's true of all organizing. Definitely do not add anybody to a group chat unless you've had a one-on-one outreach conversation with them and assessed them, and you know that they're down. That you have like really strong union vibes and that you trust this person. But like kind of pulling back a little bit, to talk about what we're really afraid of when we're talking about like infosec and leaks, is there's two ways that information about our union organizing can leak to management. It's accidentally, and if somebody purposefully leaks it. And the second one, organizing moves at the speed of trust. Like that's how we avoid the second one, is just building really strong relationships with our coworkers while we're organizing. And even if like we're only having like very small end-to-end encrypted text-based conversations, if somebody really wants to leak something to management, they will. There is like no security best practices we can follow to avoid that happening if we aren't building really strong relationships with our coworkers. And then as for the other one, accidental leaks, that happens most often when like we accidentally use our work emails for stuff, or we accidentally open like the union Slack on a work computer. These things aren't like that risky, but as people were saying before, keeping everything off of work devices is the best way to avoid that. But also just to like, again, draw back a little bit. If you're at a point where you've got 3,000 people in a Discord chat talking about a union, your boss has so many bigger problems that like a little leak isn't going to fix for your boss. Like if you've already organized 3,000 people, you are an extremely powerful force, and a little leak isn't really gonna hurt you that much, because you're probably not talking about the really sensitive stuff in a 3,000 person chat. I'm currently in a graduate student union. We have thousands of members on our listservs. We know university administration reads these emails. We know they get them somehow. We don't put sensitive stuff in that, and like you won't either, and it'll be fine. It'll work great.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I guess this is something that I don't know, Keith, if you want to mention, and then about kind of how you can secure yourself if you're really active in trying to organize at your workplace, and like a specific way that you can protect yourself. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? And then I'm going to let Vicky talk about ease of use versus security, because that's a question that did pop up in our chat.
Yeah, absolutely. Document your good standing with the company. That's the best way you can protect yourself. And that, that makes you harder to disappear.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, Vicky, go for it. Talking about the, because we talk about all these big platforms, but it's sometimes not as easy to use or for some of our colleagues. So would love for you to talk about that.
Yeah, so being in a tech unit, people are extremely excited about tech solutions to everything. We need to encrypt all of our emails and go hardcore, and we know how to be secure. We're going to keep the company from hacking us. And at some point, it's difficult. Like, I can't always get things to work. And if we're expecting hundreds or thousands of other people to buy into some complicated scheme to make sure that we're extra secure, you're going to lose a lot of participants. And so it's really important that you are able to step back and meet people where they are, even if it's like you're a little bit nervous about it, because as Emily said, you trust these people, you brought them in for a reason. And by overcomplicating things, you're going to make it harder for them to get involved. And you really need to like lower that activation energy as much as possible.
Yeah, just to jump off of that, we had folks that were like, in the very beginning, we were like, should we be using should we have everybody like use encrypted emails? Can we use Google Groups? Like, can we have would it be okay for people to like sign on using get union communications using their like regular Gmails or whatever? And we just decided we should just do that, like have people use their regular personal Gmails, because they're not going to like sign up for Proton Mail or whatever just for the union stuff.
Yeah, like different things work for different workplaces. I know that I've had workplaces that were like not of folks that, had signal or didn't even know what that was. And so sometimes we would make a Facebook group under a name that was different and then just like talk on the Facebook page about things. And it was like a private group, so just think about where people share information, where people you see more participation, and you can just ask folks about that, like where's the best place for us to communicate, and it is definitely some people, there is sometimes fear around that, but really any place that you can get people talking. Okay, another question that we have is about I'm going to combine again two questions. One of the questions is, I'm losing people faster than I can talk to them. So like people, I'm assuming they're getting laid off or people are leaving the job. And then another question that's kind of attached to that is, you people in your workplace don't want to talk about organizing. So you're faced with, with people either being, it says repulsed by organizing, but also there might be some people who just maybe have a not a very excited reaction about that. Does anyone have any advice around those two things?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about having a bunch of people leaving and trying to organize in that context. Honestly, the real answer here is that it's just really difficult. You know, people have real lives and people have real concrete material sort of decisions that they're making based on things that you can't really change, right? So it's hard to, obviously on the surface we can be like, I mean, there's no escaping this sort of structure, just because you're going to another job that might have nominally better, whatever, who's to say that can't be taken away. And so we can try to have those sorts of conversations and illustrate why it's important, regardless of where we're at, to be doing this type of work. You may be losing a lot of people. And so I would say just realign your own expectations based on the actual situation you have in front of you at your workplace. And so a practical example of that is if you feel like your workplace, or you specifically where you're situated in your workplace, isn't somewhere that is sort of ripe for organizing towards a union campaign, then maybe just try to shift sort of how problems get solved on your team. I've heard people talk a lot about trying to co-opt the retro, and trying to take the retro, which, is like a common agile practice where teams get together to discuss sort of the issues that they face and how they can fix them. And oftentimes the solutions and the action items and the framing for that is all managed and facilitated by leadership or management. Trying to just solve problems on your team independently with your coworkers. And that can be something that is just sort of like making your life easier, one, and two, opening those doors for people, or opening those horizons for people to see that, oh, I can actually solve a lot of these problems just by going directly to my coworkers. So yeah, a little bit of expectation management, and yeah, it's tough. So just best of luck.
Yeah, and I do want to take a stab at that as well. Aside from the point that Hesh made, that the ground is not always ripe for this sort of movement. There is also something that I found that the more people you can get in the room to do the work, the easier it is and the less of an uphill battle it will feel like. And you should make sure that those people are all talking to each other. Our campaign really took off, after, I mean, it went on for a year and a half, and we struggled with that cycle of attrition too. We went from being at the cusp of going public in late 2021 to just barely holding, or not even holding, a majority anymore of support. But ultimately, what brought us back to a point where we came out swinging was that we got the organizing committee that, as it was constituted at the time, late last year, and everyone got into a Slack channel, and we just started talking to each other, and not in our little silos where we didn't know what everyone else was doing. There was accountability that way, there was visibility that way, and we all had our eye on the same prize.
Absolutely. Vicky, go ahead.
I also wanted to mention that a lot of the reasons that people have for leaving a company, not all of them, but a lot of them, are the same sorts of reasons that could convince somebody to organize or form a union. If you're leaving because of pay concerns, for example, that's something that a union could address. Or if you're leaving because of job security, again, something that you could work on together. And because when you're having your organizing conversations, you're not just like selling them on a quick fix. This takes time and it takes commitment and things like that. But you want to hear from them. You want to know their issues, how stable they feel at the company. If they're thinking about leaving, they're thinking about it. You asking them is not going to like suddenly bring it to mind. So that's a reasonable conversation to have. Like, how happy are you here? And if you're not, why? What could we do if we work together? Let's brainstorm. Let's think about ways this could be better. And so you are painting like a picture of a brighter tomorrow, but at the same time being really realistic about what would be involved, how they would need to, pitch in a little bit, and we can figure things out and it'll be good as long as we stick together and organize.
Mhm.
It was
Absolutely.
also
And I know that there's a few of you that talked about like petitions that had kind of maybe nothing to do with organizing a union and things like that. But would you all give any tips around how to organize, how to expand your organizing committee, or how to start talking to people when you are kind of facing a backlash or facing a denial of wanting to do anything about the issues that are happening at work? What are some ways that maybe you have brought in people that that did not want to do anything to organize or to be a part of organizing something at your workplace?
a thing that was helpful for us to when talking to people who are more privileged and didn't really see the value of a union was bringing in one-on-ones with people who were much less privileged at the company, and building empathy there and talking about circumstances in different departments. Things are very different for some people, so that really helped a lot of people sort of realize that even if there aren't problems that are affecting them right now, there's a lot that needed to change across the company that collective action would be able to help with.
I definitely agree with that. There are some parts of our organization that are better supported, have more sort of agreements with management that works in their best interest. They're like, yeah, everything is cushy. We've always been given nice things. It'll be fine if we just keep on keeping on. And we talked about equity issues very much, as JJ said, like, that's great, but have you heard about this other side of things? Like, have you heard about these bad things that are happening to other people? Have you heard about these things happening at, say, Twitter, where people are being laid off? Have you heard about laws changing and rights being taken away and things like that? Do we really want to count on things always being rosy and beautiful in our happy little world? Maybe it would be cool if we could write these things down in like a legal document of some sort and sort of codify everything. And so that was another motivator to say, we have good things, let's just write it down and be sure we have them next year too.
That was huge for us as well. Was people who were like really excited about and happy with their benefits and saying like, yes, but like this could change at any moment, and like, let's get this down and codified.
Yeah, just a quick thing. There's a lot of people who, when you pose it to them, they don't really want to organize, but everyone has problems. And a lot of people will be like, if you try and kind of frame things in terms of an organizing framing, then they won't be as receptive. But they might be receptive to, for example, hosting a monthly sort of happy hour movie night because they personally like movies and want to have their coworkers watch stuff and talk about it after. And so now all of a sudden, someone who might have been not super receptive to organizing is now creating this forum for everyone to come and, watch movies, and creating this new sort of social network, and maybe even shift, through that action is shifting their own perspective on what it means to organize. And you as an organizer talking to them can help them realize what you're doing right now is actually just organizing, which at its core is building solidarity with your coworkers. So sometimes it's just helpful to reframe things for people.
Love that. At the end of the day, we're just trying to build solidarity with our coworkers. This kind of moves into the last question. Maybe if one person can give a 1 minute quick answer, but someone asked, given that many remote workers have higher pay and better condition than some of the in-person parts of their company, for example, remote Amazon data analytics workers versus an in-person Amazon warehouse worker, how can remote organizing best be coordinated with other types of worker organizing in the same company or industry?
So I can talk a little bit about that. So I'm in a tech worker union, but we also have the editorial union, the Times Guild, in our same building. It's like the newsroom and security guards and a wide range of people that existed as job titles 80 years ago when the union was formed. And so they are much more in person, and they have a lot of different issues, but we do sort of build up social networks together. We collaborate on things. We talk about where we can align on different issues that we do care about. And we sort of have each other's backs and talk about how having a bigger swath of the company is going to make us more powerful in getting things done. So even though, say, we do have a lot of highly paid engineers in my group, we are all looking out for the security guards in the other group who are trying to raise the salary floor in their unit so that they can, say, live in New York if they're going to work in New York. There are a lot of different sort of hybrid things that you can do. And I wanted to mention one that was super cool that the Times Guild organized. There was a Zoom rally. And there was also an in-person March on the Boss sort of petition, here you go. And the way that it was hybrid was the people who were there in person being very visible were making noise, and it was amazing, and sort of traditional union rally sort of sense. But a bunch of people were online, and there was a commentator, a parade person. All right, so you can see walking by here. They were fully emceeing this. It was delightful. People were tuning in just because it was fun, and also learning about things as they were going and getting more engaged with issues that were impacting other people in the company. So I think finding a happy medium for some things can really connect folks. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. We are out of time. However, I just wanted to put it out there that if you were not able to make it to the session because of timing issues, don't worry, we will send out the recording, and we should continue having these conversations, right? Because it's really important that all of us who stand for workers' rights work together for all workers. Because as Harsh said, this is all about solidarity. This is about worker solidarity, and seeing ourselves as workers, which oftentimes is not the case, and especially when it comes to tech workers or workers that work in these remote settings. So I'm going to post a few links in the chat. And so if you really want, to learn more about organizing, you can take our foundational training, which goes a little bit step by step as to how to go about that. You can join EWOC as a volunteer. We always need volunteers. And then also lastly, if you want one-on-one support, just fill out the form on that link down there, and then one of us will contact you, and we can support you one-on-one in your organizing efforts. I just want to really thank everyone who could be here, and I really want to thank our panelists. If you could just give them a round of applause virtually. To Emily, Hesh, Vicky, JJ, and Keith, thank you so much for sharing all of your knowledge with all of us. And yeah, until next time, I'm really excited to see what we do next.